All right, guys, we're back. We're back again. CABAL back again. What is up? If you are here, drop a question in the chat. Drop a comment in the chat. You don't have to ask a question. Drop a comment in the chat if you are here for the CABAL. Drop a comment in the chat. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Drop a comment in the chat when you are in. We're gonna hit hard tonight. We don't have as much to catch up on, so we're gonna hit the key points and move this forward. Drop a comment in the chat if you are here. Drop a comment in the chat. Just got to get ourselves to that magic number. Princess Diana. What about Princess Diana? Sammy Rocks, I had to do another one. I had to do another one because there was just some really important stuff that could not be left out, and I'm unlikely to be on until the next week. So this is going to count for this coming week's COVID Cabal, and then we'll do one the week after. So want to catch up on some things. We got enough people here. Let's get rolling. Good to see you guys. Basso Man, Alan, JL Newman. All right. So before we get to the meat of this stuff, I just need to make a little comment about that Donnie Darko guy. Because this is, I'm glad that I wanted to poke the bear a little bit. I wanted to see what kind of stuff comes out, because, and if you guys are familiar with the Donnie Darko guy, he's the guy who's got these threads. He gained tons of traction because he's talking about Trump being the Antichrist. But I think I outed him the other day because I was looking at his little thread here. He says, the growing threat of Orwellian tyranny is a reality that can no longer be ignored, but this is 100% by design. The darkness is being revealed to us now so we may be initiated into the light's rebellion against it. The Masonic ritual of darkness to light. Lucifer's light. And then it goes to this whole thing. But it says here that in one of these comments, see here. Where is this? I gotta read this one because it was, well, fuck. Where's this tweet? He responded to something here, but at any rate, it was basically that we are that what he was basically saying. And it's in this thread somewhere. But basically, this is it. The unveiling of the occult mysteries. Satan bringing us out of tyranny and into his light, discovering the power inside of us, that we are our own saviors. This is his deception. And this one was this lit off like a fucking bell for me. Because I was like, okay, now we're starting to get this person to reveal himself, what he actually thinks. It's very clear. Because let's break this stuff down for a second. According to Donnie Darkened, if you take responsibility for your life if you take action, if you pray to be used by God and you are called to do something, and that something involves you taking active part in trying to stop some injustice, then you're working for Satan. That's what he's saying here. That is what he's saying here. That us being in tyranny is part of Satan, but us being brought out of tyranny and us discovering the power within ourselves is also part of Satan. And this is a total misunderstanding of left and right-hand path. It's total misunderstanding of it, okay? And I know before we get into the meat of this stuff, but I gotta get this out of the way now because it's pretty important. Left-hand path is service to self. So it's trying to accrue power towards you, turning yourself into a godlike figure. That's what it is. It's an inverted structure. It's basically taking what would be the natural hierarchy to God and drawing it towards yourself instead, turning yourself into some all-powerful figure. It's hierarchy. That is what the left-hand path is. The right-hand path is not you doing good things, but also still being, how do I say, like centered on yourself. That's not the right-hand path, okay? And I actually think to some extent, there may be a semantic argument with this guy. To some extent, there's a semantic argument. Because if you're a good person, but your incentive is you want to go down there and you want to fight evil, and you're thinking for yourself that this person's bad, I got to stop this person. This is indeed the primrose path, so to speak. This is a potential trap, and this is outlined in stuff like Star Wars, right? Where an individual who is of good heart, like Darth Vader, right? Good person, wanted to stop the bad guys, but has his ego drawn into it. That individual can be corrupted by the dark side because he's essentially trying to pursue good with the left-hand path structure. And we can call this sort of a lower consciousness way of doing things. And we've seen throughout history good people stop bad people, or let's just say people who have all been in pursuit of power have done both good and bad things. But they're still fundamentally taking the left-hand path. And this is what this guy is referring to when he says left-hand path and right-hand path. But those are both the left-hand path. The right-hand path is service to others, but more than just simply service to others, it's surrender to a will that is not your own. Now, the difference between what this guy considers that to be like, surrendering to God, it's not your fight, it's God's fight. That's this Christian thing to do. And that's true. It is God's fight. What he doesn't seem to get, because he's got some sort of like weird medievalist hang up, is that doesn't mean you don't participate. You take this kind of thinking to its logical conclusion, and it means you literally do not do anything here. It's like a Pharisees kind of thing. Well, you can't, cross any, you can't get in the way of any laws. You just can't participate in anything at all. So if there's some injustice going on, you don't intervene, because that's God's will. God will take care of it, which I think is fucking pussy, but I also think it's wrong. It's just a completely incorrect understanding of what it means to be a Christian. It's a completely incorrect understanding of what Jesus himself did. And it also doesn't understand the whole concept of being connected to God, because when you're connected to God, your intuition is guiding you towards certain actions. It doesn't mean it's patience. It's the zen of martial arts, of being able to wait in the stillness. It's this complete self-control and surrender. But it's not for the glorification of the self, it's for the glorification of the higher. And so if you're told to sacrifice yourself and do something, you would do it. That's the reason that martyrs in the Christian church existed, because they were told that they should go out and they should preach the word despite what might happen to them. But for whatever reason, this guy seems to think right now, when we have human trafficking dystopia, that you are actively part of the cabal. You are falling for a false light if you do anything about it. Literally, what he is saying is, let Jesus come and take care of it. You are a serious fucking loser if you listen to this guy. And I'm looking at these people in his comments, and I mean, a lot of them are just nutcases, honestly. They're like psychos. They're looking at me, they're like, you have a pyramid in your logo. Oh, he's been initiated. He's part of them. He's initiated into them. I mean, total fucking psychos. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen is these guys are going to sit here preaching their gloom and despair. And this is why I brought up the whole tweet with a very, very, very simple point, which was, does this person's tweets, do they make you feel stronger or weaker? And I can tell you, there's such low vibration shit coming from it. It's like, well, the world's full of sin, until God gets rid of sin, there's nothing we can do. All we can do is just sit here and pray. Well, yeah, you can pray. And then when you pray, what do you hear from God? What do you hear? Unfortunately, a lot of Christians don't want to participate in this world. It's like they can't reconcile the fact that, and this is actually the same, this is a cross problem in any spiritual circle. You see the same thing in the New Age community, where you have people who want to be in 5D. I hate 3D. 3D sucks. I don't want to be in 3D. I just want to be in 5D. It's all flowers and unicorns. And no. Bad stuff's not happening. Gotta go to my special place. It's bullshit. You are here to integrate. And integration means understanding the shadow and understanding the light and moving beyond it. But you don't move beyond it unless you're willing to stand in integrity and say no. If this guy was saying, okay, well, yeah, what I really mean is that I'm not going to participate in anything. So if this guy's telling me he doesn't pay taxes and he doesn't participate in the system at all, that's different. I actually respect that. I understand it. Okay? Because then he's actually saying, like, he's not going to participate in any of the gains. But I guarantee you, this guy, like a little bitch, does everything he's told by the Cabal Masters, and he's waiting for Jesus to come here and save him. And he's not going to say no. I bet you anything. I want the receipts. I want the receipts to see that this guy, like, if his point is just simply passive non-compliance, that's fine, because passive non-compliance is in many ways the right-hand path. It's blocking, it's redirecting energy. It's not letting someone punch you in the face over and over again, hoping somebody else is going to come and save you. That is not what being a spiritual warrior is. It's not, it's enduring the deluge of evil, but it's not letting them stomp on you over and over again. This is the same kind of like low vibration Christianity where people are just obsessed with being a victim. You're not a good Christian unless you're suffering more and more and more. Please spit on my face again. Do it again, please. Spit on my face. And they misunderstand the specific reason for the actions that Jesus took. Jesus didn't do that stuff because he liked it. He did it because it was important for the resolution for bringing on people's sins. And it was brave because he put himself in that state. If you're sitting around waiting for him to come back and do it for you, then you just miss the boat completely. Anyway, enough about this. You guys get the point. Just wanted to emphasize that that is not the right-hand path. Okay? It's not the right-hand path. Or maybe from his understanding it is, but from all of my understanding of the occult, it's not the right-hand path. And it's different than the Freemasons who play good and evil. They play good and evil. You know what they play? They play savior, victim, persecutor. That's what they play. So they play savior. They play the savior. But you standing in integrity is not you. He's playing the same game as they are because he's looking for someone to save him. And what would it look like for him? Are they going to have to hologram Jesus for him? They hologram Jesus? I mean, I swear to God, these people, when this stuff is all over, I guess we'll find out. Anyway, let's move on. So, I wanted to read you guys. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll wait till the end on that. I'm going to wait till the end on that. Let's get to some fun stuff. All right, first off, let's do a little war update. So things have gotten pretty heated. We have a massive Ukrainian offensive in Kharkov, which has been successful. It's been successful. Now, and it's leading to some I think, some very likely changes. And let's talk about that for a second. So, first, assessing the Ukrainian strategy. I have to say, I get it. I think I understand I understand the logic behind it. And from the standpoint of Ukraine, I think it's a good argument. And here's why. They are taking horrendous casualties trying to take these positions. Well, actually, they're taking the positions relatively easily because the Russians are not fighting them. There has been minimal ground fighting between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces. The main exception was literally like a SWAT team. Because what the Russians did is in this whole area in East Kharkov, they do not have any regular army troops there for whatever reason. Probably a fuck up, probably arrogance, probably maybe limited forces to plug in the location given the fact that they're not mobilized at all. You know, Russia is fighting this. We have to remember, Russia is fighting this war at a significant manpower disadvantage. Not potential manpower. They have huge amounts of manpower potential that they could use, but they are fighting it under this special military operation rules, which is not mobile. They're not mobilizing any troops, and they actually don't have more than 20% of their army there because their army's in other locations. It's in Syria, it's on the Chinese border, it's in the Caucasus, and of course, it's in the northern military districts on the border with NATO. So they have been mostly using on the ground here in Ukraine. Most of the fighting has been done by the militias. So you have these things called battalion tactical groups, BTGs, and that's the backbone of the Russian army. And a BTG battalion is like a super heavy weaponry battalion. So I don't know the details of it, but a battalion is about 500 to 600 men. The difference is that this has multiple tanks, artillery, anti-air defenses, all sorts of heavy weaponry. It's very heavy. And in order for a battalion tactical group to really so it's got a lot of firepower, but you need infantry to hold ground. And so what the Russians have been doing is they've been they have these battalion tactical groups positioned all across the line, but the actual front lines are mostly positioned with the militias, the DPR and LNR militias. Um, Russia has not brought a lot of their own infantry. It's the militias on the front lines. Russia has more like elite forces that they will then use to plug in or help in certain situations. They have Wagner Group, they have Spetsnaz, they have the Chechens, of course. Okay, so you understand this. So in the Kharkov area, they were using what is technically in Russia the equivalent of um, the equivalent of a SWAT team. So they had like a heavily armed police unit, which is not trained for combat. Obviously, they're trained how to fight in small arms teams, but they're used to deal with like criminal activity. This SWAT teams were placed in like this area, and in one of the towns that was holding out in the beginning, they actually did really, really well. They fought off a lot, much bigger force. But what the Russians decided to do was that they didn't have the forces there to defend it properly. They didn't want to get encircled in certain areas. Ukrainians were sending huge numbers of troops there, and they were taking massive casualties because of these battalion tactical groups. But there was no real infantry buffer to hold the line, so they just pulled back. And the big thing in the Russian channels, war channels, are really pissed about this. Russian nationalists are really, really pissed, and I think that they're right to be, which is that a lot of these civilians were cooperating with the Russians. And now, even though the Russians have tried to evacuate most of them, not all of them were evacuated. Some didn't maybe want to go. And now the Ukrainians are doing what they do and trying them as collaborators and executing them. So it's pretty fucked up. For being honest here, it's pretty fucked up. It's a big fuck up by the Russians. Now, and the Russians are essentially now digging in on their own border. There's a possibility that the Ukrainians, for propaganda reasons, will try to even make an incursion into Belgorod. Now, here is the point, and this is an important point. Since this happened, there's been tons of pushback. Even Kadyrov himself, the Chechen leader, was making some criticisms. I mean, obviously very diplomatic, but making some criticisms, especially because the Russian Ministry of Defense wasn't saying anything. And I think a lot of people thought maybe it was going to be a defensive envelopment, and that in a tactical thing for guys who want to understand it, is a defensive envelopment is when you leave a weak point in your line, the enemy attacks it, but that's the part of the plan, so then you pull back, and then once they come into this pocket, then you can attack them on three sides, and then even try to cut them off, turn it into a pincer. So it's like people think very often about encircling units. You push forward on two sides and then surround them. But a defensive pincer is another tactic. Russians have used it in Syria. It's a higher risk tactic, and it's takes a little bit more nerve because, of course, you're giving up ground. But I think it's what well, anyway, I was going to go through some military history. It doesn't matter. But it looks like that wasn't the case, at least not to this extent, because there's definitely a collapse of the front. I mean, you just can't deny it. But the Russians have suffered almost no casualties in the process. It's been a very orderly withdrawal. Okay, so since then, as we speak right now, the Russians have now been striking over these last few hours all of the infrastructure in Ukraine. That's what I was gonna say. Cannae. That's what I thank you for saying that, because I was like, it's Hannibal, but then I had Karhai in my mind, and that was a different Roman battle in Iraq. So thank you for that, Jonathan Pshesto. So what we have right now is the Russians are doing something that they haven't done since since the war started, and everybody was really critical about them in the Russian side. There are many people who were like, well, what are you doing? They have now taken out basically the entire power grid in Ukraine, which is really substantial. For people to understand this, Ukraine's power grid is completely left over from the Soviets. All these power stations, there hasn't been a power station made in Ukraine since the mid-'80s. It is They don't have the ability to bring this stuff back online. So you are going to now see the Ukrainian state. It's going to be hard for the Ukrainian state to function now because they're running out of electricity basically. And this is just the beginning. I mean, they might continue to take out more things so that Ukraine literally will be without basic infrastructure. And remember that when you lose electricity, you don't just lose, the ability to charge your cell phones or whatever, turn on the lights. You lose heat and you lose pumped water in many cases. So we're looking at now a humanitarian situation, and I'm sure that the Russians had this planned as one of their possibilities. I don't know if they were going to use it now, if they were going to use it later, but they've broken this out, and so that's a massive escalation in the war. Massive escalation in the war. At the same time, you had Russia at the United Nations, basically saying that they want to put Zelensky in for war crimes because he was shelling the nuclear reactor, trying to cause, a Chernobyl explosion, which was true, right? We talked about that in a prior show. Crazy shit. So big escalation going on in Ukraine. We're going to see what happens. My guess is that, I don't want to guess because I know that the Russians, when they make a move, they're going to make it aggressively. But I don't know if this destruction of infrastructure, if they're going to see how the Ukrainian army manages to respond, because that's going to massively screw up all their mobilization efforts too, because now the trains can't run. So you may just see you may see the Ukrainian government begin to collapse from this. There's one other point here that I need to mention that I'm glad I just remembered. Another key feature of this offensive that the Ukrainians are doing is, so they're using all of the final stores of equipment, a lot of Western equipment here. But what I think is actually more significant, and this is becoming more apparent as the days go on, is that significant numbers of these soldiers are not Ukrainian. And what I'm hearing is that the U.S. or NATO or whatever has been paying mercenaries like $1,600 a day to fight. And so you're seeing now huge amounts, like it's almost as if a foreign army's been raised, because $1,600 a day, I mean, I wouldn't fucking do it. I would rather not get blown up or lose my leg for $1,600 a day. But if you think about this, you can have like mercenaries, people from any country. I mean, there's now reports coming in that there's a lot of, for instance, Africans there. And obviously there's African individuals or individuals of African descent in, U.S. and British armed forces, but not like huge volumes of it. So if these reports are correct, then it may be an indication that they've been really recruiting. I mean, recruiting from militaries in Africa, militaries around the world. Because there's a lot of people, soldiers of fortune, who, formerly were fighting. It would be like, man, you sign a 3-month contract for $1,600 a day. I mean, that's a shit ton of money. So they're like, well, maybe I can get in and get out. At any rate, it seems like there's a very, very aggressive action, a very, very, very aggressive action, and I have to be honest, from the position of NATO, it's a pretty good one. I mean, you won't be able to keep the Ukrainian state up forever if you bleed them dry completely. You just won't be able to do it. But I mean, for the amount of money that they're throwing out here, you can take $1 billion. I mean, let me do some quick math here. Let me just do some quick math here, guys. Let me see. Let me see how long. So if we do 1,600 Let's just say for 1 month. Let's say 2 months, 60 days. Okay? So that's $1 million per person. So you get 1,000 fighters for $1 billion with that. Oh, sorry, that's 96,000. That's not that much. Yeah, that's not that much at all. So if we're basically looking at, let's just say 100,000 per fighter for 2 months, $1 billion is going to get you. $1 billion is going to get you 10,000 fighters, right? Assuming my math isn't dog shit here. Yeah, it's a lot. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, exactly. That's going to get you 10,000 fighters for $1 billion. $1 billion gets you 10,000 fighters for 2 months. So I'm not saying it's 10,000 yet, but we're looking at a division size. Well, actually, a division would be 10,000. So it's a lot of people. Anyway, whatever. The point is they're making a big push here. They're making a big push. But we're going to see what happens next. All right. Now, here are the big things. Excuse me. So, little update on the Queen's death and the significance of this. So we've known it's a marker, and I think that the consensus now that we're a few days out is the White Hats didn't kill the Queen. But the question is, when did the Queen really die? Because this is a card that they've been saving to use for when they need it. And I was always kind of wondering, well, why would they need it? What would this card do? I mean, I guess you can harvest grease, you can distract people. But that seems like a pretty, frankly speaking, it's kind of like a weak card if that's all you're doing. So why would you need to have this kind of, why would you need the card? Why would you need to play this card? And my thinking on this is that, and I did hear this on a Wano Savage, and this was his conjecture, which is that, sorry, my throat's getting really dry, that this is a way for the Cabal to get all of their people in one place without without like any kind of distractions, without other people focusing too much in on it, and a way for them to all be in the same room so they can really talk about things in person. There's not going to be any electronic interception. Even underlings don't have to be able to hear it. And also for them to participate and go through some very significant rituals. So the idea behind this is that the Queen's death is a way to kind of call a conclave together. That's why the title of this is The Conclave. To bring them all together, and so that they can do the rituals they have to do. And then what they can do from there is, well, how do I put it? They do all their rituals together, and they can plan out how they want to approach this next stage, which is going to be very fierce, particularly in the United States. Because they know the big fights in the United States. You have Trump, who is egging them on. Trump right now is saying that he should be put on the 2022 ballot, either give him the presidency or put him on the 2022 ballot. And so you have the January 6th committee who's going through all this stuff trying to find reasons to, well, was he trying to commit sedition then? He's given them a really easy, he's given this on a platter. This is what Juan's saying. And I think he's right about it. He might be, exaggerating a bit whether what Trump's saying is sufficient to be sedition, but he's not exaggerating when he says, with the implication that he's trying to egg on this group to go after him. He's saying basically, yeah, go ahead, arrest me, see what happens. See what happens. Because we're looking at, with these midterms, people are so wise to the fraud at this point. They're so on top of it that, there's people talking about camping outside of the drop boxes, having like a little, like, what's, little barbecue, just hanging out so that nobody can commit any sort of fishy stuff. And so that would mean that they're going to have to postpone the election. And this is what's crazy, though, is that we've talked about this before, but if they do postpone the election in the states, they can say it's going to be for a month, but it probably will be for longer. And Juan's suggesting that that will be 6 to 12 months, which is pretty crazy. But I got to say, guys, is that unbelievable? The one thing I've struggled with is this. This is what I've been struggling to reconcile. On one hand, you can see that it's all coming to a head right now, in the sense that things are about to get blown out in the open, that there's no way that they can keep the cover around themselves anymore. That kid in the background is me when I was 10 years old. There's a big portrait downstairs. It's our big family portrait downstairs. So what was I saying here? So yeah, you can see that everything's coming to a head in that they're not going to be able to keep this undercover after the midterms. Either a theft or some just crazy stuff going on, right? Postponing it. It's going to all break out in the open. All hell's going to break loose. But here's the thing. As much, guys, as I would love for this to be the end, for a lot of reasons, I don't think I have to say, I don't think that means they're gone just like that. I don't think it means that, it seems too early, It seems too early to me that, because let me put it this way. So we've had this 1.5 year wait. And what this 1.5 year wait has done is it's allowed the American people to come together. It's killed the possibility of there being a civil war. But there's something to be said about the fact that we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And I feel like if, they just get taken down and nobody, I don't know, nobody participates, no one has to do anything, and it's just like everything is fixed. That just doesn't seem to jive with me. I feel like the big thing here is when do the American people themselves say no? And only when the American people themselves say no, and then when they try to make a direct attack against the American people, that's when I can see some sort of defense being put in place. But, it being really scary, like they say, okay, well, we're going to hold on to power without elections. That's when the American people will probably have some responsibility. I mean, I'm not advocating for anything, right? I'm just looking at the tea leaves. I can see that happening. And so if what we're saying here is that they postpone these elections, well, at what point, what happens next? What do the American people end up doing that then essentially forces there to be an election that can be secure? Trey, we're already attacked on American soil. I know that's not what you mean, but I just want to emphasize that. We are attacked on American soil. This has been an attack on America. When a cyber attack that takes out the head of government is the equivalent of a decapitation strike on the head of state. So we've been attacked for sure already. That's why Cheyenne Mountain is still locked up 2.5 years later. So, but if you're asking, do you think that there's going to be some nuke or missiles hitting American soil? I do not believe that. I do not believe that's going to happen. I don't see any way that could happen. In fact, I don't even see it likely right now, it could change, that there will be missiles hitting Europe, the European Union. Although that is certainly possible, depending on how the war escalates. But no, I don't see that happening. Although I'll just make a point that with these hypersonic missiles, that long-range hypersonic missiles Russia has, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't matter what place you are in the world; they can go anywhere in seconds. What about soldiers? No. How would that even happen? And I know, Trey, you're just saying stuff that you know people people have said in a lot of these circles. White helmets, UN white helmets. But no, I don't see how that actually happens in practice. This is not the kind of country that you can invade. There's like 400 million, 500 million weapons. It just doesn't work. I think in smaller countries like Canada, I think that there's been some arguments that's happened at junctures. So you could have maybe a unit that would pretend to be American unit, but it was not. That's a possibility. But what certainly isn't possible or likely in my in my view is that you're going to see any kind of like physical invasion. I mean, nobody, if you think about that for a second, it's just simply not logistically possible for anybody to do it. And it wouldn't even be desirable for the people who could do it, who would maybe want to do it theoretically, because it would, it's an easy way to galvanize the population all on one side. If you were to say like, okay, we're going to send Chinese troops into the country. The Chinese soldiers are going to land on America and take, that would just unify the American public, which would be very dangerous. They don't want the American public unified. They want it divided. So they're never going to do anything out in the open like that. So anyway, I'm just thinking that I could see when this stuff blows up in the fall that we still have at some point in 2023 before we start to fully take things back. But you can see that we're in the the ascending position. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but I think 2023, it ain't done. It ain't done unless you want to be like Donnie Darko and just sit out and don't and not want to be involved with any of this stuff. And look, we to a certain extent though, we are like him because we're not involved with it really. What we're doing is we're spreading the truth, we're spreading awareness. It's information warfare. It's what you do. It's what you do. We've never advocated for any violence. We've never advocated for anything crazy. We're just commenting on what's going on. We're having some weird conversations. That's all we're doing. Trying to predict future events. So, but the point here is that the Queen's death was an opportunity for them all to come together, to have these meetings, to have these rituals, and to prepare for this next big push. This next big push. That's what it's all about. Because once they all get back to home, I think that's when we can start to see some stuff get crazy. Final point I wanted to make when it comes to the Queen. I'm just throwing this out there because I do think that there's something to say for complicated dynamics. And we see this stuff even happen within families. We had with Kushner and Trump himself, right? There's obviously something going on there. This is something that was difficult to, I'm just going to throw it out there. What if the Queen herself was not bad? Or let me put it this way. was willing to break away from the cabal. And this is why I'm going to push this stuff. I'm not going to push it. I'm going to put it out there because I don't know myself. I want to see what you guys think. But hear me out before you comment, all right? Hear me out before you comment. Trump and the Queen had a very good relationship. Now, I know that some of this stuff can just be for surface appearances, but they seem to have a really good relationship. Trump's mother was a really big royalist. She loved the Queen. Maybe he had some nostalgia for this, but let's think for a second. Brexit was important because Brexit was pulling Britain out of Davos. And so what happened was that, and so you look at Trump and the Queen, and you could see that, the Queen is herself a puppet, right? She's herself a puppet because she has to go to the City of London and she has to bow before the financiers, the Rothschilds. And so when you look at it, is the British royalty, how much power did the British royalty really have? I mean, obviously they're all in this kind of club, but was the British royalty kind of like, yeah, you get to remain figureheads, but really the power's with us? And so is it possible the Queen herself, I'm not talking about Charles, different story. I do not think Charles is a good man. I don't necessarily think the Queen's a good woman. Again, this is just for contemplative purposes. But you had this really good relationship with Trump, and Britain was being pulled away from Davos. And we have to ask ourselves about that. Why was it important for Brexit to happen? Because it doesn't look like materially anything really happened in the end, because the political establishment was captured by Davos and sort of brought back under heel. But the Queen gave her vocal support to Brexit. So was this a plan to try to pull Britain away from the World Economic Forum Davos? That did not work out. And here's the second part of it. So the Queen was announced dead, right? Queen was announced dead recently to call this meeting, but nobody in the Awake community really takes it seriously that she just died. Because remember, at the time of COVID, we have not seen her since then. She left Buckingham Palace during COVID, and she moved to, I guess, this castle in Scotland, or at any rate, she never returned to London. And they just said, oh, she was resting. But it was like a little bit absurd, right? A little absurd. You can't make a single public appearance in 2 years. I mean, I guess there were some things where she was allegedly there and you could have a double. But she was gone this entire time. And I don't know if you guys remember, but it was in spring of 2020. I think it was spring of 2020 that they showed a video of the Queen, and then they had her dancing, right? And it was like to say, haha, oh, this was all green screened. But the subtext beneath it was that, yeah, we can green screen the Queen or blue screen her. It was completely digitalized. Green screen is you, an individual walking in the background. Blue screen is completely digitalized. That they can just basically make an image of her, and how would you ever, you could have her give an address by video, and you'd have, it could be totally digitally generated. And I think that, I'm just throwing out as a possibility, that video may have been some indication to other people in the know that the Queen was taken out. I wonder if the cabal, because the Queen tried to break away, when they made their big attack in 2020, I wonder if they took her out. Or maybe she just died on her own. It's also possible she just died on her own. But she's been, so to speak, put on ice until this moment. Some food for thought. I'm not claiming that Charles, and I'm not claiming that, certainly not Andrew, which I don't know if you guys saw the video today of him grabbing his daughter's ass. I mean, this is the pedo guy from Epstein Island. You know, Elizabeth's family was certainly very compromised, and people knew that Philip was, her husband, was very compromised. And so the question here is, do you believe that she was somebody who was put in a position, she was boxed in on all sides by her compromised children, right? By her compromised children and husband. Did she have any moves that she could play? Maybe she tried to make this last move to break out of it, and maybe her intention was to pass the crown on beyond Charles to William. It's all some food for thought. This is a idealistic interpretation of the royal family, but I will say that it certainly doesn't seem like that family was completely unified if you look at Harry and if you look at what happened to Diana. It doesn't look like the family was fully unified. Philip was a well-known womanizer. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean anything on its own. But he had a lot of extravagant tastes, let's put it that way. And it wouldn't surprise me if his son, especially Andrew, that they engaged in similar things. Let's put it that way. Diana and John Jr. were friendly. Yes, they were. They were, and they did kill Diana, obviously. The question, of course, is just who ordered the hit. And this is, to contradict this whole theory, this hypothesis I'm proposing, is that it's commonly believed that the Queen herself did it. And honestly, the two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Because she may have felt like Diana was learning too much about the family, was going to start to reveal things. She wasn't playing along. But was that even the Queen's decision, or was that the decision of the people above the Queen, the financiers? It's just very interesting to think about, because I don't think I've heard a very convincing, because Brexit was such a muddled thing. Brexit's one of the most confusing things that happened, because everybody understood it was very significant, and yet it was really like stillborn. And it's unclear exactly what it was trying to accomplish in the end, because Britain seems to be so much behind all these things. So we'll see. And that, Jeff, to your point, yeah, not only that, but the time between the doctor said she was seriously ill and her death was extremely short, a single day, 0 warning. Yeah, I mean, I honestly think, if you, I get it for the normies, they don't think twice about this kind of stuff. But of course, it just coincidentally is the day after Liz Truss is sworn in, right? No problems. All of a sudden, she's dead. Yeah, come on. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. Now, what's interesting is that there was some, and this is another tell that it was all planned out, is that in the UK, there's some apparently global aviation event that all these global leaders were going to go to, except for Putin, right? All these global leaders were going to attend this global aviation summit. And then, of course, the Queen dies. And that's a way for them all to have their schedules pre-planned to go to the location already without giving it away. It's like they're all planning to go there for the big meeting. Very, very interesting. And this is why I like people like Juan, because this is information that you probably only find out unless you have an intelligence network. People who can keep an eye on these kind of things. Because it's very, very... very hard to piece together otherwise. And, there's your answer right there. Putin's not going to the meeting. He's not in it. He's not in the club anymore if he's not going to the meeting. Yeah, well, Harry and Miss Markle, they're a total, that's a total mess, That's a total mess. They're just very messed up people, and I think Harry in particular has tons and tons of emotional work. to do. Given how Harry behaves, it's hard to imagine that Meghan would be attracted to him at all. So that's the big stuff here. I want to confirm what one of you guys said before, that the Knights of Malta were disbanded. That is true. Very interesting. Leadership was removed, at least. And we also know that there's some big moves. The Vatican's pulling all their money back to the Vatican on October 1st. So this is what I wanted to, the last thing I wanted to just mention real quickly is just to give you guys a scale, an understanding of what's happening. Because, we're talking about all these issues with, crops, but we haven't been really seeing anything terrible with the food prices. Obviously, there's inflation. But we have to remember that crop issues this year are food problems next year. So I'm just going to go through this list very quickly. The hard red winter wheat crop in the United States was the smallest this year since 1963, but in 1963 there were only 182 million people living on the nation. Obviously our population is like double that now. The rice harvest in California would be half of what it would be in a normal year. U.S. tomato harvest comes in at just 10.5 million tons, over a million tons lower. Worst corn harvest in the U.S. in a decade. Carrots in the U.S. down 50%. Sweet corn in the U.S. down 20%. Sweet potatoes down 13%. Celery down 11%. It's all in the U.S. Peaches down 15%. Almost 3/4 of American farmers say this year's drought is hurting their harvest. Cattle in Oregon is down 41%. Cattle in New Mexico is down 43%. Cattle in Texas is down 50%. One beef producer in Oklahoma is now predicting ground beef could eventually top $50 per pound. 40% of the U.S. has been suffering from drought. Worst multi-year mega drought in the last 1,200 years. Europe is experiencing the worst drought in the last 500 years. Hunger stones are getting revealed in the riverbeds. That's so bad. Corn production in the EU is down 20%. Crop losses in France up to 35%. Crop losses in the UK as high as 50%. Crop losses of up to 50% in parts of Germany. Farmers in Italy have lost up to 80% of their harvest. Agricultural production in Somalia is down 80%. Somalia? I didn't know that they produce stuff. East Africa, 7 million animals have died. Worst drought in China in history. India is normally 40% of global rice trade, but it's way down because they don't have rainfall. A third of the majority of the crops in Pakistan have been washed away due to the flood. 65% of the country's food basket has been washed away. And that may actually be 80 to 90% of the crops. Price of fertilizers have tripled since 2021. Others have quadrupled. And Americans are taking short-term loans out. The amount of Americans taking short-term loans out for groceries is up 95%. Demand at U.S. food banks is worse than it was during COVID. Millions of people in Africa are facing really very real possibility of starvation. 828 million people around the world go hungry each night. There will be multiple famines in 2023. And of course, we have in Ukraine, we have pretty much none of the harvest is getting out. Europe has been buying some of the food in Ukraine, some of the grain in Ukraine, and it's been taking it off the market for a global market, so that there'll be more starvation. They're getting a really sweetheart deal on it. This was a big thing that Erdogan and Putin were complaining about because they negotiated this grain deal, but then the EU wasn't really letting hardly any grain leave. We're talking like less than 1% of the grain left Ukraine over ship to leave. What grain has been getting out has been sent to the EU, but most of the grain isn't going anywhere. That's 17% of the world's grain, pretty much completely wasted. The only The only bright side in all of this, of course, as it would have, is that Russia's wheat harvest is exceptional. So just can't really make it up, can you? Can't really make it up. Um, really makes you think about who is God smiling upon and all this stuff, and who is he not. So, um, well, Jeff, this is interesting. You're talking about Bank of America, front of the line, the fall off the cliff. BlackRock is also seriously, seriously overextended in the mortgage crisis. And Bank of America and BlackRock are both the two big boys who are with Davos. So you can see that some of this warfare that Tom Longo talks about with Goldman and J.P. Morgan making these moves against Bank of America, BlackRock, and Citi, etc. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. In the USA market, Citadel has closed their UK offices, opened new business in the UK, opened 8 lines of credit. You don't do that if your business is healthy. Citadel is the biggest market maker in USA exchanges. It's it's a problem. It's definitely coming. I mean, and I think it's going to happen before the election because Powell's going to want to crush it before the election, and Putin's going to put the squeeze on before the election. And I think that's part of the reason that Putin's been waiting, because if you want to hit the cabal as bad as possible with the PR before the U.S. midterms, then you're going to wait to break Ukraine to start to make some massive defeats on Ukraine. You're going to do it just before the election. I'm not going to say that that's the only thing going into their timing, or even if it's a significant thing. I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. I mean, you could see possibly they'll wait till the whole winter before they do something. Who knows? Who knows? But we're going to start to see all this stuff come together around the same time. And I think that we start to see the real action begin after all the heads of state come back to their locations after the Queen's funeral. Because they'll have done all their rituals, they'll have got themselves on the same page, and they're going to make their last big push. Their last big push. And we're going to be on the receiving end of it all. I would say, Alan, that maybe Truss couldn't be on the end of the deal if the Queen's been gone a while. I think that they wanted it to happen because they want everything to be clean slate for this next push. They have new king, new prime minister. I just think that that's where they're going with it. That's where they're going with it. But I'm sure that little Yorkshire girl wanted to be the last prime minister to speak to the Queen or whatever. Certainly possible. Would I consider Meghan Markle to have Jezebel or Jezebel energy? I don't think so. And the reason is I don't know that. I mean, she's certainly a parasite, but she's almost more of like Harry's mommy. Like, I actually think of her as more like she's a little more masculine. She's a little more masculine. I don't see her as. I mean, look, I have no doubt that she was good with him sexually and stuff like that. But her main advantage was the emotional stuff. That was her main advantage, was being like mommy to him. And I think that she genuinely cares about him, but at a certain point of being that pathetic, you just can't be attracted anymore. I think that's what happened. Bank of America is allowing new mortgages for minority homemakers with zero down payment. Exactly what happened in 2008 prior to the crash. Yep, this is crazy. This is crazy stuff, guys. It's all coming together. Ben, how accurate do you find muscle testing in your personal experience? I don't muscle test. I have a friend of mine online who muscle tests regularly, and I let him do it. To muscle test, you have to really there's a whole process you have to go to. You have to really neutralize your thinking, and you have to make sure you're completely objective. And I just haven't wanted to do it. It's just not been of interest to me. I feel like, while I'm not as precise as if you were to do it super calibrated, my intuition is pretty good at gauging. So I'm rarely surprised by a muscle testing result. Winter 2023 will be the dark winter. No question about it. Yep. All right, guys. I think that's it. Be safe. Be safe these next few weeks. And love you all.